Glasgow's housing crisis has deep roots in a decades-long process of privatisation. Ideologically driven decisions such as the Right to Buy scheme have completely decimated public housing. In 2003, all of Glasgow's public housing stock was transferred into the hands of unaccountable housing associations, or social landlords. In the 1980s, 70% of people lived in social housing. By 2019, this had fallen to 30%. For the past decade, average rents for private tenants have increased 20% higher than the inflation rate. A one-bedroom flat now costs around £600. In 2010, it was around £430. That's nearly a 40% increase. Vacant land is being sold off for private developments, leading to the gentrification of working-class communities. Tenants have to pay extortionate rents to live in poor quality housing while facing landlords refusing to carry out repairs, increasing rents and threatening evictions. There were nearly 2,700 properties in Glasgow lying empty for at least 6 months in 2021. Every 19 minutes a household becomes homeless in Scotland. The housing crisis is out of control.
Living Rent is Scotland's tenants' union.
We are building a mass membership organisation that is democratic.
It is run by and for our members, and we are not affiliated to any political party.
We know our current political system is failing tenants, and that's why we are building a union to confront this situation, to make affordable, quality and secure housing a reality for all.
We use collective power to improve our neighbourhoods and tackle the issues we face locally, such as rent increases, evictions, private development, service closures and waste crises.
We bring members together to ensure we have the power to secure improvements to our daily lives and put power back where it belongs.
In the hands of ordinary people.
We became a tenants union in 2016 and we've now grown to an organisation with over 2,000 members across Scotland. We are trying to create a new way of practising politics and of being engaged with each other. We believe that every single person both has the right and the ability in them to influence what their community looks like and to make political decisions, complex political decisions. And I think that's a dignity that's not really awarded to people in our kind of mainstream political discourse. Glasgow obviously has a long history both of terrible housing conditions, but also of community resistance to those conditions and community efforts to improve them. So going back all the way to 1915 and the rent strikes led by Mary Barber, going on to both poll tax protest as well as campaigns to prevent or improve dampness and conditions in Easterhouse. We are very proud to keep building on those struggles in Living Rent, and we see ourselves as actively contributing to that history. We don't just want an affordable and safe and secure and non-commodified housing system, but we want people in Glasgow that live in these neighbourhoods to have the ultimate say over what will happen there.
Living Rent is organised from the bottom up. So a branch has about 100 members, but before becoming a branch, what you have is groups. Members are getting together, but the difference between a group and a branch is around the number of people in it. So groups might be, they're below 100 members. Sometimes you have groups of 20 members, in an area. So for example, in Glasgow, we have about maybe 20 members there in Finnister. They're not yet a launch branch, but the idea is that, they're starting to organize, and eventually by the time they reach, to about 100 members, then they can have a launch, and then they elect a committee. So each of the branch has an elected committee elected by the members of the branch and accountable to the members of the branch. Each committee has a chair, a secretary, a member defence officer, a membership officer, communication officers, and sometimes treasurer. In these branches, then you have delegates that will then attend the different forums. So again, the chair and secretary of each branch will attend a citywide forum. The citywide forum attended by 2 delegates from each of the branches, and the idea there is to coordinate eventually citywide campaign, but to also get members from the different branch to meet, to also share what they are doing, what's working for them, etc. Similarly, we have the national forum. So here what we have is again the 2 elected delegates, 2 delegates from each branch but not just Glasgow, across Scotland. This is all about, the national strategy. So for example, the current national campaign to bring rents down and to push for better rights for tenants is happening at that level. And then we have the National Committee. So the National Committee is about 10 members from the union that have been elected by the wider membership of the union at the annual general meeting. And they are the board of directors of Living Rent, and they are responsible for the governance of the organization. And to support members building the union and building more branches, we have a staff structure as well to support it.
I joined Living Rent as a GHA tenant because I wasn't getting any satisfaction with my landlord. During the pandemics, they stopped the close cleaning, which is a communal area, and they didn't clean it for a year. So basically when we took that up as a protest against them, the Scottish Government brought in guidelines for landlords to continue with communal cleaning, and there's 2 other housing associations in this area which took up those guidelines, but GHA didn't. The closes were filthy and they were smelling, and this was during the height of the lockdowns and the pandemics, and they said eventually the guidelines were just guidelines, they weren't law, so they didn't have to do it.
I joined when I heard about the campaign to defend the libraries and to push for an opening date for our local library. So Langside Library had been closed during the pandemic, as most had. So when lockdown ended and things started to open back up, Glasgow Life weren't really given any dates basically on when certain libraries would open. These libraries especially tended to be in communities that need libraries most. And it was a concern basically that it was a method of just closing libraries and never giving a date. We worked with other groups in the community to do readings, and we did a demo outside Langside Library just to push for an opening date basically, and we got an opening date and the library's open again.
I got involved with Living Rent a couple of years ago because I felt that I don't really have a great deal of faith in parliamentary politics in Scotland or the UK at the moment. I felt that getting involved with an organisation like Living Rent would be an effective way to build community power. The interests of tenants are not well represented in the Scottish Parliament and the UK Parliament. I think something like a quarter of MSPs in the Scottish Parliament are landlords themselves, so that's a kind of an idea of the disparity and the competing interests. So yeah, I got involved because I felt it was a good way to be part of a genuine community empowerment project and hopefully achieve radical change when it comes to housing and social justice.
I grew up in Sweden. Housing in Sweden tends to be fairly good. And then I moved straight into student housing in Glasgow, and I could not believe the state of it. In the second flat I lived in, we had leaks from the ceilings, we had mold in the bathroom. One winter morning, my flatmate was pulling down her window because she'd opened it to get some air in, and the bottom of the window completely fell off. And then it was just left unrepaired for 3 months. It's very clear to me that it is very possible to achieve a better housing system. We just need to light the fire to make it happen.
I was having a whole host of problems in my own house. Our boiler had broke, our pipes had burst, the place was soaking wet, there was no heating, there was all sorts of problems, and it felt like a never-ending back and forth between ourselves and the landlord. And it got to that point where we'd exhausted every option except tribunal. I was looking about and stumbled across Living Rent, and yeah, I signed up, and on the sign-in thing there's a little thing like, why are you joining? And I put in like, I'm having some problems. I heard there were some resources. It was actually just like PDF packs that I just wanted to read and see what there was. And then I actually got a call from one of the Living Rent staff members, and from there I managed to get some really good help from some of the other members in Partick, and with their help and alongside them I managed to take it to my landlords, and pretty much because I had that backing, just name dropped Living Rent and I got a result. I got money back on the damage that had got done. I got pretty much instant repairs, and I think ever since really I've been treated a lot better by my landlord.
I think Living Rent kind of gave me a sense that there's something could be done because of their campaign against Serco, which is a multinational outsourcing company which had the Home Office contracts for asylum seekers in the city. So they decided overnight to evict 300 people with lock change evictions. And so kind of through that campaign, Living Rent was like leading on like the member defence and kind of keeping out people from like evicting families that have no recourse to public funds. And like I just saw the scale of the injustice, and I saw the people that were actually working to do something about it and actually doing it like through direct action and kind of collective organising.
So I'm chair of the Shawlands Langside branch, and basically I chair branch meetings, work with the secretary to come up with the agenda, and yeah, just basically work to ensure that all meetings are democratic, safe space for everybody, and just kind of respect the values of Living Rent. We'll have a little catch up, usually a highlight, maybe even a low light of the week, you know, just to break the ice, make sure everybody's comfortable. And then basically for the next 30 minutes or so, we'll focus on the main point of the meeting. So that's usually, if we're planning an action, that would be the main kind of focus. We tend to break off into smaller groups, covers more ground, and is more accessible for people to get involved with as well. And then the final 20 minutes of the meeting are usually updates from around the branch, so that's updates on member defence cases, important dates coming up, whether that's actions, protests, things like that, and updates from citywide and national forums.
Member defence is what we call individual work. We help individual members with particular issues they are having with their landlord or housing association.
I'd put myself forward for a member defence training session, which is in the Living Rent offices in Glasgow, and when we were there, it's a full day's training, and they cover lots of things from the planning to the thinking about the outcomes you're looking for, what sort of pressure points you can put on the landlord or whoever the target is.
And it was just running through a case and running through from kind of start to finish the process, what might happen, how you plan for different contingencies.
When a member defence case is raised, it goes to the member defence coordinator, and they'll kind of get a team together. They'll get a member defence team, and then they'll kind of reach out to the member, they'll go check out what the issue is, and then they'll kind of start an action plan of how they're going to tackle that issue, how they're going to go see the landlord, what the plan is.
Community organising is kind of the main bulk of the work that is happening in our neighbourhood branches. It means anything from setting up a stall at the nearest square or going door knocking.
If you don't reach out to the local community, you don't know what the issues are, you don't know what the problems are, you can't build a membership, you can't build any power.
Hi there, it's Matt here from Living Rent Glasgow. We're the local tenants union. Just knocking doors in the area to see if people are having issues with their tenancy, so like deposit or repairs or local community issues. How have things been for you?
Some of the issues that people were speaking about were the waste crisis that's currently going on in Govan Hill and across the city. Rubbish in the streets, rubbish in the back courts, largely due to lack of investment. People were complaining about bins overflowing, having the vermin that gets generated by that, and all that sort of thing. It's a pretty common issue in the area, and we've been campaigning on that issue for a long time. One of the other things that got mentioned on the door was landlord was attempting to evict them, and from what I understood from the conversation, that the way they were evicting them was completely illegal. Hopefully we can build a relationship with that person and make that a member defence case, and hopefully prevent them from getting evicted. People want to be heard, people want to be listened to, and people want to find their own solutions to problems, and people do that. And hopefully through what we do, we can bring those people together who have found the same solutions and build something that can make those changes that the people want.
We'll have stalls and we'll talk to people within the area who might be tenants. We'll ask them, do they think the rent's too high? Do they have issues with landlord, issues with accommodation?
We typically set up the table, we all sort of gather around that, and then it would be a case of someone will say, oh, here's a person walking, just go up to them. It's obviously, they might think we're Mormons or something like that, so it's a delicate approach, just being like, hi, and then as soon as they realise we're not selling something, I think they're quite receptive, just having a wee conversation.
I think most people are really happy to speak to us. I think people are a lot of the time thankful that someone is actually bothering about it. We take people's individual concerns and try and collectivise them.
We do a campaign every year, and we have to campaign on something in the local area that we could fight towards or highlight or raise issues with.
And you take one issue at a time, because again, this is where you need to put all your energy into one thing to be able to win it. So usually branches list all the problems, right, that they are in their neighborhood and pick one that they're going to start with. By the time this is one, okay, great, there's more. What next? You have to be a bit strategic around what do you start with. So you need to consider a bit what are your resources and like what is it that that you can win as well.
Everyone in Partick is dealing with the same problems. Mice and rats is probably one of the biggest ones.
We just spoke to people in the streets. We asked them if they were tenants in the local area. Yes, no, what kind of problems do you face? And a really strong theme throughout all of them was that they had issues with rats or mice, or like the local housing association, Partick Housing Association, failed to adequately carry out repairs, so like there's holes in the walls so the rats would get in that way. So it was kind of it seemed like there was really basic immediate solutions to these rat problems. Block the holes, finish off the job that you started and they won't come in. The central issue wasn't just the rats, it was people feeling that the housing association or their landlord wasn't accountable to them.
There's a distinct lack of repairs. We've had member defence teams working with tenants that have disabilities or illnesses, chronic illnesses, that are living in damp infested flats and homes, or unfinished large repair jobs where pipes are shown and floorboards are up. And I think some of the buildings are starting to kind of decay a little bit because of lack of maintenance. Regular repairs, technically they should be done within the month, but most people are waiting 3 months plus. So this is why a lot of people out of frustration, especially when their health's affected, are turning to Living Rent to get the support and advice that they're looking for.
Denniston's one of these areas that's been pegged by property developers and bloggers and everything as this up and coming area. At the end of the day, Denniston was built as a working class community and for a long time was a working class community, so gentrification's a massive issue. We speak to people who are born and raised here who have to move out because they don't want to just rent and pay fortunes to people, and they certainly can't afford to buy because the value of the properties went up so much. Something like 45 to 50% of right to buy properties are now privately rented. So you've got, half the housing block, or the social housing block is now in private hands. Working class communities have become atomised and sort of shunted, so different people maybe move towards the east, different people go to the south, the north, whatever. Wherever they can avoid sort of paying the mental prices that they do. And what you're talking about is dismantling a community that's been there for decades.
There's not a lot of space in Partick that is zoned for housing development. One of the last pieces of developable land in Partick is down by the River Kelvin, wedged in between two extortionate purpose-built student accommodation blocks. There were proposals to build another block of student housing here, and given our experiences as a tenants union in Partick, who've spoken to the local housing association, who have said that they don't have enough housing stock. So we felt that the proposal to build another student block on the last place that you could have maybe built social housing was an insult to the area and to the community, and in no way reflected the housing needs of the community.
These student developments are like mini high-rises that are £900 for a room and access to a gym downstairs, but they take up so much land that could be redeveloped for people that actually live here and actually need that space. I'm not saying that the students don't deserve that, but if that housing was built for everybody, they could also benefit from that as well.
I think that there's something like 5,000 units of purpose-built student accommodation in the Partick and South Partick, York Hill area. The Housing Association, I think, have about 2,000 properties. So there's already a massive disparity, and it's changing the area, and people are being forced out of the area. People can no longer afford to live in the area that they grew up in.
There isn't enough concern for human beings in this city that I can see. It's all about the money. The private landlords have moved in, they've bought the properties that were for sale, they've got them, and they're renting them back to people at double the money. So my fellow tenants in the very next building are paying double what I'm paying for exactly the same as I've got. And some of them have got smaller than I've got, and they're still paying nearly £200 more than me.
You only have to look at the homelessness, the amount of homeless people in Glasgow, the amount of people living in fuel poverty. It's like, it's shocking the amount of people that don't have housing, and the access to social housing as well. So many people are forced into the private rented market, and then you get rogue landlords. So kind of rent controls and like regulation of kind of renters' rights is something that kind of the government have to act on.
You know, if you try and view any historical event, look at the fall of the Roman Empire, you can't view that through the lens of individuals, but we will look at things like the property market, all these different things through the eyes of an individual, when it doesn't really make sense to do that. It's fundamentally polluted the way that the system works, because the system simply cannot accommodate the absolute whims of every individual. However, we can enjoy an extremely good standard of living if we collectivise.
Our members recently put together a climate change statement on behalf of the union. The point there is to really spell out that housing is also a climate change issue, and housing is a site for climate change struggle. A large proportion of emissions in Glasgow do come from private dwellings, and one way that we can really tangibly improve people's lives is by making sure that our homes are energy efficient, they are built to last, and that they are built in sustainable locations. So the statement puts out our commitment to putting climate change at the heart of a lot of our campaigns. Climate change, just like the housing crisis, is not the fault of the individual people that are living through it, and no individual action can possibly solve these massive structural problems. What we need is to come together collectively and dare to imagine what a different future could look like.
Where I think Living Rent sort of exceeds is combining small-scale member defence cases with individuals and larger campaigns.
One of the most formative and emotionally difficult cases that I was involved in was an eviction that was bound to happen just a few weeks before Christmas. And our member came to us, and it was quite late in the process, and obviously our member defence team got together, and we clearly saw that GHA had failed to communicate clearly with her, and that she was in rent arrears based on no fault of her own. Also, in principle, no one should be forced out of their home during the winter, and especially around Christmas. So through kind of sustained protests outside of GHA's office and getting politicians involved to put pressure on GHA, we did manage to get into the room and negotiate a repayment plan with GHA and increased support for our member.
I think one of the cases that stood out to me was a tenant with a housing association basically was experiencing really bad damp in their flat.
They contacted the housing association. We no luck for 6 months. The member had lung cancer, so it was real like a real troublesome time for them.
Basically, members came together to write a stern letter to the housing association to make the appropriate demands to make sure that the member was protected and their health wasn't affected any more than it was. And it was successful. The housing association basically met all their demands straight away.
We did a protest outside Wheatley House, and we highlighted the fact that their CEO gets paid just under $400,000 a year. And we put posters up and we spoke to people and we highlighted this is what this man's getting paid, but they've put a rent increase up with their tenants but gave them absolutely nothing for that rent increase. No cleaning, no maintenance, no repairs, nothing. So we basically highlighted that to a lot of people who were unaware of it.
We had an issue where a member with a young family had a rat problem, and there were rats. In the middle of the night, this person's children were being woken up by rats jumping into their bed and crawling all over them. And it was a small flat anyway, it was too small for the number of people that were living there. And the rat problem, as I said, was so bad that the kids were struggling to sleep at night, like school the next day, because they've got rats literally crawling all over them. The person told me that the best way to describe it was that the flat comes to life at night in the dark. You can hear the rats everywhere. And this was a Partick Housing Association tenant, and we met with them and we said, this is unacceptable, this person has to be moved, you must have vacant properties. And we'd heard through the grapevine that there were vacant properties in the area that were run by Partick Housing Association. I said, this person has to be moved as a priority, this is a safety concern, and they were totally unwilling to deviate from the allocation policy, just hitting you with like policy. It felt really corporate, It didn't really feel like you were talking to a housing association, a provider of social housing. Eventually that tenant was moved somewhere else. There was an agreement was put in place and they were moved. But in that initial meeting there was no willingness to budge.
One of the first cases I worked on was this young guy, and he'd moved into a really nice flat, and he'd come to moving out, and the landlord had sort of jumped right on him and says, look, because of the damage to this flat, I'm going to have to withhold the deposit. The photos that the landlord had sent our member claiming that this was damaged was laughable. It was like, you know, maybe a bit of cheese on the sink. It was a tiny little bit of mould on one of the corners, which is obviously, I don't really think, his fault. Scuffs against a couch, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that was it. It emerged that the landlord hadn't secured the deposit with one of the registered deposit safeguarders. He had kept it himself, which is a breach of rules that can be fined up to 3 times the deposit, essentially. So we could go then back to the landlord and say, look, if we go to tribunal with this, there's a chance you're getting a fine 3 times the value of the deposit. Let's settle this now, out of tribunal, and sort it out. It did end up going to the first stage of tribunal, but in the end, the victory came to us. I think the member got £1,800 in the end, which was a huge win for him. And more than that, it was also an apology. They wanted acknowledged that they'd been mistreated here and they'd been taken advantage of, and they got that acknowledgement in the end.
A lot of the times, if you have a member defence case, people are not willing to talk to their tenants. So Living Rent obviously have an approach where we're not afraid to take to the streets, to show up outside of people's houses, to show up outside of their offices and do direct action to make sure that our members get treated with respect.
There's different ways to put pressure on them. So large corporate landlord, you'd likely be pushing for basically attacking their sort of credibility on social media, leaving sort of basically making it really visible for them. Private landlords, I think, is a slightly different approach where you're maybe putting direct pressure on them as an individual.
We're not going to go away. We're going to keep pressurising until you listen to our demands, basically.
My name is Rizwan Murtaza. I'm originally Pakistani. I'm living here like more than 5 years in UK. We had a very bad leakage from the upstairs. One day I was just taking shower and my half ceiling just dropped on my head, and I just talked to my landlord. He said, okay, clean up, we will see. And it was a big hole, and I was like a month without nobody come to repair it.
The carpets had been ripped out. There was also like leaks in the kitchen ceiling and the bathroom ceiling. The bathroom was really bad because the roof had actually caved in, so his toilet was unusable, and he was paying rent for that house when really he was only using 1 bedroom, because even the kitchen he couldn't use it because there was like infestation and like just nothing had been done about it.
We had a problem with the bed bugs and the cockroach. Once when I asked to my landlord to help me this, and he said, okay, we will bring someone to spray all the flat. I was away like more than a month with my family. We were just out and just give him flat to make renovate little bit. And he never done the spray, and he just say, I put the spray, which was a totally lie. He just lied to me. I just opened the cushion and it was full of cockroach. Imagine how horrible you're living with the 3 kids in one flat and you have this problem. And he always blaming on us that we don't keep it clean, because nothing to do with us, because cockroach was already under the carpet, which was first day I'm telling him just we have to put us something more hygienic like a laminate so we can mop it and we can wash it every single day.
His family had moved to Romania because they couldn't live in this house, and he was stuck because he couldn't find anywhere else to live.
I was scared to death because nobody's there, and it was so horrible situation. And the Living Rent team, he just helped me like a part of his family, and they just take the matter in their hand.
Today we're going to chop on my landlord's door to basically discuss getting my deposit back. I left the flat a few months ago now. I was still waiting for my deposit to be returned. The weekend after we'd moved into the flat, our shower started leaking down below, which was apparently a common problem before we moved in, and that happened 7 times throughout our tenancy in a year. Also the oven was out of use for a whole month, and that was like constant back and forth asking. Just like slowly got repaired. So Living Rent have been supporting me, basically knowing my rights. So at first I didn't know that a landlord had to protect their deposit in a third-party scheme that's government approved, which is really good. So that's what we're fighting here today. And they've just been helping me articulate letters and communication between me and the landlord. The landlord's sort of saying that there's like disrepairs that he wants to charge me for, but a landlord isn't entitled to do that if they haven't protected it. But then I'm also sort of arguing that it wasn't in a great state when I arrived at the property. If we can get the deposit back and what we're asking for, but if we can move somewhere forward, then that'd be great. We came here to see Thomas today, and this is his registered address. I'm still waiting on my full deposit to be paid back. We're waiting on a tribunal application. We were hoping today that we could settle it here, but we've still not found him.
If we found out that he basically tore the house down in the middle of the night, hasn't had any permission, so he's sort of demolished it without permission, is now trying to get more property built on top of it. So, and we also found out that he owns another couple of businesses that we didn't already know about, which gives him some targets in the future.
We discussed the plan basically, so the specific kind of things he wanted the landlord to fix in the flat, and also like to stop the harassment, because like it was quite bad. It was like he'd show up random times with no notice, he'd be outside parked up for ages, just like intimidation and things, and it was really playing on Rizwan's mind. And the fact that his wife and kids couldn't be with him was also like a big thing. The fact that the house wasn't livable for them and that they were just waiting for him to like rehome so that they could come back. The initial letter drop that we done was to the supposed address of the landlord. It was the address that was on the landlord register, and when we went to it we actually found out that that house was also being rented out by the same guy to another family. I think he kind of knew there was like a union behind him supporting him, so that's when he started to get a little bit scared and was like, is there anything we can do like to sort it out amongst ourselves? And obviously Rizwan was like, well, it's past that because I've tried so many times. And so we ended up agreeing to a meeting with the landlord at Rizwan's place. So in that meeting we had the letter, he also had a copy of the letter. The demands we wanted him to meet were just like, I think 4 demands, so fixing the property to a livable standard, not asking for I think a certain amount of months rent because Rizwan had withheld rent because he was only living in one room. I think the last 2 had to do with harassment, and that we would do a check after all the repairs were done to make sure it was at a livable standard. The landlord, he was a wee bit like, okay, I've read your demands and stuff, and he was just trying to like justify it. At one point we had to ask him to leave the room only because there was a few things we wanted to change in the demands. So when we got him to leave the room, that actually worked in our favour because he was like, I guess kind of just mulling in his thoughts, and by the time he came in he was more responsive and like ready to agree to our terms. So much so he had like this complete power trip where he was like, okay, I agree with the demands, but I want to write it myself. The guy literally wrote out the exact same demands. I think he put 1 extra demand on, which we didn't even ask for, but I mean it worked in our favour anyways.
At the end we end up with the agreement with my landlord that I'm gonna keep the last 2-3 months. It's like a 2.5-3 months rent. I live in Springville. Now my family came back. I'm the happiest person who's joining the Living Rent. They're treating me like a family.
This is Will Park. It goes from Macintosh Court all the way to Ark Lane. There's high unemployment and there's a lot of people, elderly or young children or families, but are in poverty and don't have the money and they rely on food banks on benefits. Living Rent wants to fight for the people at Will Park and also to open up the Will Park Community Centre. It's a GHA property and they must have shut it because of lack of money or cutbacks. God knows why they shut it. We still don't know from this day onwards, so we're looking for answers. We tried to get hold of GHA, but they're not answering. Somehow we're going to get through to them.
Today, Living Rent Union, Denison branch and the Will Park residents have got together to highlight the problem with GHA not reopening their community hall. We want it open. It's vital to this area. It was well used for quite a while before the first lockdown, and we want it reopened again.
We need it reopened for the community. The community has been neglected around here for far too long. And we want the hall opened so the community can meet together again.
We know that it's actually in very good condition because it's used for all of the elections. It's always a polling station for every election. And so we think it's scandalous, the fact that this is a really good resource for the community here that's completely unused.
We're going to have some tea and coffee and some snacks inside the tent. That's just ongoing for the day to chat with people. But we've also got a couple of activities. We've got bingo, we have got arts and crafts, and we have got Zumba. Now, these three activities were done inside the hall when it was open a few years ago. So we're highlighting the fact that GHA is leaving us out in the cold.
It's been noted amongst Well Park community residents that they are building these mid-market rent properties, and they're advertising about all this amazing community space that's going to take place across the road from Well Park. While at the same time we have this community resource here that's not being used and literally has the doors locked. What I would like to happen today is for GHA and for Glasgow City Council to realise that there is a massive appetite amongst the people of Well Park, but also the people of Denison at large for this community centre to be reopened as a place that the community should be able to use.
I am a Living Rent Union member. I joined them after having some serious issues with my landlord, Partick Housing Association, and having no success in getting them to adequately carry out the repairs and upgrades to my flat. When I moved in, I realised that the bathroom door hit off the toilet, that once I'd stripped off the wallpaper, that the walls were really badly damaged, the plaster was crumbling. It transpired that the socket for the gas cooker was at the wrong position and therefore was unsafe for any gas appliance to be fitted. There's a giant hole in the ceiling of the hall cupboard, which in the first few weeks before I'd properly moved in, I'd requested to be fixed 3 times. It's still not repaired. When the ventilation engineer came out last year, he took meter readings. It was 80% humidity. And he'd previously explained to me that humidity increases as the day goes on. So I'm looking at 100% humidity by 5 o'clock in the day. So there's no surprise that I've mould, or the fact that it takes 2 to 3 days for me to air dry clothes in this property. So I'm just living in this constant state of humidity and dampness. The properties just aren't fit for 21st century living. The mice and the mould have probably been about the same length of time, probably for about 4 years. The mice were coming in through the kitchen, as far as I could see. I contacted Partick Housing Association, so the pest control guy came out, he laid out some poison. He indicated where the holes were that needed to be filled. I contacted the City Council. They got back to me and they were like, right, we'll just put down more poison. I thought, well, there's no point in putting down more poison. They're not eating it. They're still coming back. It's more the property that's the issue. I have Crohn's disease, which means that I need immediate access to a bathroom. And they proposed that when they carried out the repair works to the mould in the bathroom, that if I needed the toilet, I could go round to their offices, which is approximately 4 minutes walk away. I explained that I would likely defecate myself if I attempted to walk round to their offices, to which they offered their sympathies and stated that they didn't need to offer any assistance at all. I started withholding my rent in November last year because they have failed to show that they can adequately carry out the essential repairs that need to be carried out, let alone the upgrades that need to be carried out. We're now at the stage for me with Partick Housing Association that they'd rather evict me than decant me into a property or transfer me into a property that's suitable, that's habitable. They've willfully held back properties and willfully dragged on this situation. Even their decant policy states that if there's a medical reason for a decant, then that should go ahead. Once the property has been sourced, once they have adequately given me a list of the repairs, then I would transfer the money over. But they'd rather take me to court. They've forgotten the reason for housing associations, why housing associations were created. They were created to provide safe, quality housing for people. They were supposed to be the ideal landlord. No one should be living like this. And that's why Living Rent is essential.
The basic damp, mould and slugs was the issue for me. Getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and standing on a slug, whether it be in the hallway or whether it be in the bathroom, because it made its way to the bathroom, wasn't it? It was horrific. The rotten carpets, the damp, the mould, it was starting to destroy everything that we had. Our wardrobes, it was getting into our beds, it was getting into the kids' soft toys and things like that. The amount of stuff I was throwing out was ridiculous. So when it came in the third winter, I was like, I can't do this on my own, I need some help. My health was quite bad, and I was getting nowhere because the landlord was, they'd tell me they were going to do the work, and then a couple of weeks down the line, the letting agent would tell me, oh, the property's been sold again, they're not your landlord anymore. And then I'd have to start the process again. All this time not getting any repairs done. I'd seen a wee newspaper article that mentioned a tenants union. And I thought, well, that's different. I've never heard of that before.
Well, I'm here today in support of Martin, who's a tenant here with GHA, and he's been treated really poorly by them with just bad maintenance, repairs not being conducted, and not only that, but he's now being chased for arrears that he really shouldn't be owing given the circumstances. So we got ourselves organised here today to show GHA that we're not going to take it, and we're going to start a campaign to get Martin the arrears and repairs that he deserves. So when his ceiling fell through during the lockdown, they just replaced it with plywood. It's a very temporary fix. No one chased it up. Mould and damp have been allowed to accumulate, and nothing's been done about it. When this was raised with GHA, they slap him with rent arrears. So it's not only are they not interested in fixing the problem, but they're actually making Martin's living situation worse and less secure. We've been communicating with the housing office for several months now through various means, email, letter, contacted our local Labour SNP councillors as well. We've had very little success in getting any sort of response. The reason we're here today is because we initially asked representatives of GHA to come meet us, talk about what's going on and see if we can get some sort of deal for Martin, and unfortunately they've not responded. The experience that we've had is what response we are getting has been very, very hostile and combative, and we think they haven't really conducted themselves in good faith. But we're not letting it kind of get in the way of what we need to do here for Martin, which is like state his case and keep campaigning for it until we get a solution. Castleknock branch is something that we've been working on for years, so it's been really, really exciting to start building that kind of local power.
So finally I got in touch with Living Rent. They came to my home and I'd showed them the various problems, and they were horrified, to be honest. The fact that, these live slugs were, slipping in and out the house, and the gaps under the front door were like that. The gaps in all the pipes in the toilets, you could literally see crumbling inside and outside, and the mould and the damp was coming up from various places. It was extremely bad under the window in the kids' bedroom. We sat down and we made a kind of action plan about what I could do. So the first thing I thought I could do was, well, I've tried emailing the letting agent quite a few times, and they've not answered. Maybe it's time I went and I had a face-to-face conversation with the letting agent. So the guys at Living Rent had said, well, if you're going to do this, to be heard, then we'll be there to support you and make sure that you're heard. When we turned up at the letting agent's address, it was a hot desk. There wasn't even a person there. It was just an answer machine and a telephone on a desk. When we couldn't get the letting agent to have a face-to-face meeting, we couldn't get the landlord to have a face-to-face meeting, we thought, well, if they won't come to me, then I need to go to them. And I thought, I'll make up some placards, unethical lettings, what my family's getting. I love slugs, just knowing the bathroom, kitchen and bedroom. And we got there and there was a nice lady called Mandy who was absolutely horrified when she seen that myself and the other activists from Living Rent had came with a Living Rent banner and, you know, our placards, and we were there to protest that, you know, my letting agent was ignoring me, the landlord was ignoring me, and something had to be done. That went on to and fro for about an hour. So the next kind of thing for us to do was the guys at Living Rent says, listen, we can have a planning meeting and we can all sit down and we can look at the, you know, what options have we got, who else can we talk to. We got in touch with Susan Aitken, who's the leader of the City Council, who is also my local councillor and local representative. So I went along to a constituency drop-in, and again, Sonia and a few of the guys from Living Rent had come with me because I thought, this is I feel I've got a battle coming on. I feel I've got to keep fighting this, but to do it on my own, I just gave up and probably put up. But the fact that I had other tenants supporting me and saying, well, do you know what, this isn't good enough, Anne-Marie, we're all going to go together. I'm going to let her know that she needs to do something to help your family and your situation now, because you've exhausted everything else that you can do.
Shawlands Arcade is a bit of a landmark in Shawlands. There's a lot of local shops, essentially, small businesses especially, and it's right on Shawlands High Street and is really important to the community.
They're trying to redevelop the Shawlands Arcade, and what they're trying to do, they're trying to build 600 luxury 1 and 2 bedroom houses. It's a private landlord who's going to own all 600, so he'll be collecting the rent for all 600 properties. It could raise the population of Shawlands by like 10% potentially, and they're going to build no doctor surgeries, no dentists, no schools, no nurseries, no social housing particularly. You know, it's like the area is shouting out for social housing.
It would be so high that it would basically be, I think it's 10 times as high as the tenements behind it. So it would really change the landscape of Shawlands High Street. What we want to do as members is engage with the community, make sure people are aware of the actual plans and, you know, what's going on, the effects that it could have, which include driving up rent in an area that's already being gentrified very rapidly. It would mean that a lot of low-income renters especially would probably be forced to move out of the area. So yeah, we want to make sure people are aware of the plans and also hear what the community would want in this kind of space as well. The worry is that the small local businesses that are there right now, if a developer comes in and wants to create this kind of more luxury space, chances are the rent will go up to a point where a lot of those small businesses will be forced out.
We're speaking to people, they want it to be like a community centre. You know, there's a lack of things like a youth club, community centre, studios for creatives, things like that. That's what people, we're asking people what they want to see the Shawlands Arcade used for, and that's what we're getting from a lot of people.
It's one of our demands is that there's more communication between the community and the developers, and that they do actually give more concrete dates about things like planning permission, because essentially we'll have 30 days to respond, and any objections that we have, we need to make sure that we have time to engage with members and the community and really make sure that we can try and get our stamp on the plans.
They have not come back like with anything else to present, you know, to people, and that's probably also part of the pressure that we've been putting as well on them, because they know that they are people that are not happy about this development and they're organising around that.
There's been no mention of social housing and no mention of affordable housing, whatever affordable housing is. We know it's never actually affordable, but yeah. Luxury flats are the last thing that Shawlands kind of needs, and certainly the development would drive up rent everywhere in an area that's, I think it's 50% gone up in the past year rent. So it's just really important to make sure that the community has a say in this essentially.
I'll say,
start of December 2018, the orders were put on the house that compelled the landlord to do these repairs. And a builder turned up, but when I come back from the first day of them doing the repairs, they'd actually painted 3/4 of my house with gloss paint. It was on my furniture, it was in my cooking products in the kitchen. They'd literally just went to any surface that was white in the house, or any surface that had any kind of damp or mould on it, and just painted white gloss paint over it. He'd been told by the landlord to go in and paint the property. I said, but I thought you were here to do repairs. And at this point I started to get quite upset. It all became a bit much. And I was really glad that Sonia for Living Rent was there. And because she could see me I was physically reduced to tears as I walked in my house. They're supposed to be here dealing with the kitchen, the bathroom and the room, the rotten carpets, the damp and the mould, and they're painting everything. And we toed and froed for about 3 months. And I suppose that's when I realised I was going to have to maybe take the advice of what the council workers had been saying to me when they were wandering around, inspecting my house before they put the repair orders on. They were saying, if you went homeless, you wouldn't need to put up with any of this. Just go homeless and we'll get you somewhere new. But that's a big thing for a mum to do. And, getting to the age of almost 50, I'd never been homeless in my life. So to me the thought was horrifying. I applied to all the housing associations and everything to ask to be rehoused when I lived there. None of it ever came to fruition. Never moved up anybody's lists with priority, or the fact that my house was in such a state of disrepair that they had to repair orders put on it. I was supposed to move up all of these lists and be high priority, but nobody seemed to be prioritising me, and the only support that I had at any point was just the guys for Living Rent. We've got half of the house done, and we've really stepped up to the challenge, and I couldn't have done any of that without the Living Rent guys. I couldn't have done that without them, knowing that they were there to support me. When they offered me this flat, I was really tickled pink because it was a 3-bedroom that I needed. It had 3 double bedrooms. It's bright, it's airy, and it's quite well maintained. My personal plan is starting with just this one block, getting to know my fellow tenants, telling them about Living Rent, and how the power used to be in the tenants' hands. And somehow that's been eradicated because the organisations have become so big that they're not going to hear what us local people are needing and what we want and what we expect.
We were here to confront Let's Direct about the treatment of Robert, our member and their tenant.
I'd moved in on the 22nd of April last year, so I paid 3 months up front. I paid £2,500 up front. So as far as I was concerned, my rent was due on the 22nd of every month, but they said that the rent was due on the 12th of every month. Because I was a few days later, a week late, that's when they started entering the property, just randomly, without authorisation or without notification, in 6 different occasions that I know of at the moment. One of which I was actually asleep. The guy had woken me up and asked if I'd just lay about all day, even though I'd been working nights. One of the times as well, where my wee boy was actually in a state of undress when they let themselves in. My wee boy's 9, he's got cerebral palsy, so as you can imagine that was a little bit disturbing. Another time my partner was topless, and there's been unannounced visits from them when I've not been there. I started getting a whole lot of threatening emails from them in December, and because they let themselves in unannounced and stuff, I had to find temporary accommodation. So because I found temporary accommodation, I'm having to pay for that at the minute. So I'm using my rent money for that property to pay for the temporary accommodation that I've been forced to use because of them. So obviously I'm in rent arrears, which I'm asking damages for, which I'm not willing to negotiate on at all.
Today we came here to talk to them, to try and negotiate an end to the way they've been behaving, to try and get a settlement for him and his rent arrears. But they shut up shop. I think they got wind that they were coming, and they're afraid to talk to us. They're afraid to be confronted by the things that they've done to Robert, and I think they're afraid to face up to their job or their role as a landlord. The next step for us is to keep trying, is to keep at this and to grow the case, to involve more people that have been affected by Let's Direct. and to, you know, come back, try again, try and get them to talk to us, and try and get them to come to an agreement with us over their treatment.
Living Rent's absolutely been fantastic. They've been a full host of support, both morally as well as legally.
It feels good to see people come out in solidarity with each other and just helping each other. We need more of this.
We met Irene and sat with her for a good probably 2 hours, heard about all our complaints.
Scottish Power were pursuing Irene for a debt which they had ascribed to her, which she wasn't due.
They had owed me money, and then all of a sudden they gave me a bill that says I owe thousands, you know, but it was the other way around.
Part of the issue was that there was no definite bill, there was no fixed figure that they were asking for. One letter would say 1,300, one letter would say 1,100, one would say 1,400. One particularly confusing one said that it was a red letter demand for £0 and 0 pence.
Scottish Power, payment demand escalated collections, 30th of April 2021. You need to make your gas payment or make an arrangement to pay. Your account is being managed through our escalated collections process. Your payment of £0 00 pence is overdue. Please act right away. You need to pay it or make an arrangement with us to pay it to avoid further action.
That harassment was also followed up with threats from bailiffs, essentially. Not quite bailiffs, but Scottish Power's enforcement agency. They were threatening to come change our locks and change our meter, force entry into the property, essentially harassing her.
When we visited you, we hand-delivered a notice that we would apply for a warrant of entry if you did not pay your outstanding electricity balance of £1,469.50. If you don't pay this now, we will proceed with our action.
Even as an outsider coming into that case, it felt scary. It did actually feel scary. The wording of these emails, the wording of the messages and the letters is so threatening. It was demands, it was threats, it was if you don't do this, we do this sort of thing.
Sometimes I feel it's as if I'm telling it as if it's somebody else it's happened to and not myself. I can't describe at times the fear.
Irene did have a boiler in her flat for 8 years and she was barely in the flat. She was not using a lot of electricity. And they just were not clear on where these arrears came from. Irene was completely appalled at the way she'd been treated, and she very clearly she didn't want this to happen to anybody else. Like, she was very much up for fighting for this, shining a light on this and saying this is the way Scottish Power have been treating their customers, this can't go on.
What we wanted wasn't just a victory for Irene, it was a victory, you know, for all Scottish Power customers and anybody else that's facing the same sort of harassment from, you know, a big corporation.
On the south side of Glasgow, we've had both campaigns around cleansing and forcing the council to improve cleansing services.
We did a joint protest last year with the cleansing union due to the changes with cleansing and bin collections in this area. We've had a massive problem with the changes they've done with the bin collections and also with the lack of them during the pandemic.
So the GMB, the cleansing branch in Glasgow, are absolutely incredible. All they're asking for is the money to do the job, and it's kind of, they've been trying to highlight the issues around waste in the city, where like the council is pretending nothing is happening, it's saying nothing's going wrong. We kind of had some meetings with the GMB and we decided we'll get all the branches in Living Rent Glasgow kind of talking together and kind of create like a citywide campaign as opposed to just a Govan Hill-wide campaign, because we felt it's the only way that we could get attention to the issue was to, you know, keep escalating it. The important thing for us in the campaign was twofold. So one, not to blame workers, because, you know, if you're working with, you know, your budget's being constantly cut, you know, how can you be blamed? You know, you need investment and you need like better working conditions, like less people are doing a more unsafe job. And the other one was kind of a lot of blame gets attached to the people that live here. So like trying to avoid a blame game with neighbours, essentially, in various communities that live here, and kind of just saying that the root cause of this problem was underinvestment, a lack of investment, and austerity.
The council are blaming the individual residents in the city for the state of the city, completely omitting from the picture the fact that funding for the cleansing services has been absolutely slashed over the past 6 years. I think the numbers are something like 1,200 refuse collectors down to 800, 800 street sweepers down to 400, and only 213 of them are manual street sweepers. It's classic blaming communities for the state of the communities while slashing jobs, shafting workers, employing people in precarious conditions. It's all related, and the message being sent out is that it's our fault. Get everybody pointing the finger sideways and blaming their neighbours and blaming workers rather than pointing the finger upstairs and blaming the people in charge that we've elected to run this city and we pay council tax to.
You could tell that the council knew something was going to happen because you could see streets being cleaned kind of in the run up to the day, and then suddenly we still managed to find 100 bags of rubbish just lying on the street.
What we done in the end was figured out that the best pressure point that we could attack Scottish Power would be their media image. And to do that, it was all about getting an alternative story out about them. And to do that, we decided that the best thing would be to generate a lot of noise, get their name and company all over Facebook and the news, get as many interviews as we could to generate publicity against them.
Kind of started planning an action, and that was when I kind of became involved a bit more, was when the action started to be planned. So that was to plan a kind of a protest and a letter dropouts at Scottish Power headquarters.
We'd made a big banner that said Scottish Power exploits the powerless. We had all these placards and signs. We'd all worked on it together, the three of us and Irene. And we had all this stuff with us, and then we drummed up support amongst other Living Rent members, which was fantastic, really, because these people who'd never met Irene, never had any stake in the game, weren't Scottish Power customers. They all rallied round after they heard the story.
We went with the letter, and I was going to hand it to make sure that CEO Keith Anderson got it. We weren't allowed in at the front door. They says, oh no, you can't come in, etc. But there was a nice gentleman that says, right, if you go round the back. So myself and Lewis went round the back.
We got to hand over a letter of demands to one of the staff there, and we put the banner up over the motorway just next to Scottish Power's offices in Glasgow. And within about a week or so, they were on their knees pretty much. They were asking, what can we do? How can you back off, get our names out of the paper and things like that? Not in those words, but you could see that's what they were meaning when they were saying, we're sorry.
These are really big bits of rubbish. I think the chairs would be too big to go in our bag.
We're here today as members of Govan Hill Living Rent, really to just draw attention to the massive scale of the waste crisis in this area, but also all over Glasgow. So the branch have been running a campaign for the last year or so to try and push for more investment in the area into cleansing services.
We spoke to our members and contacts in the area, and this was found out to be the hot issue in the area, and we decided to organise a campaign around it because it was affecting so many of our members, and also as a way to sort of demonstrate what the union does and the methods that we operate in, the methods of taking direct action, and to sort of use that as a way to let people see what we do and how we operate, and to encourage people to come together and take action on things.
So all the rubbish that we've got here, we're going to take over to City Chambers, and along with 3 other branches of Living Rent, just to show visibly this is what we're living in day to day, and then we're going to take all the rubbish away at the end of the day.
It's so easy for individuals to be blamed for a problem on their doorstep, and actually the issue is about how we invest in refuse and how we make sure that we just sort of try and create a system that is more manageable and equitable for people to be able to feed into. It's connected to housing, it's connected to the distribution of wealth. It's connected to who gets access to what facilities. You know, I think if you live in a shared building, the pressure is much harder, and I think obviously there's lots of tenements around here, and yeah, I just think it's a campaign that is completely connected to the rights of renters and also the rights of housing more generally, so it seems sensible and necessary. So that would be what's your take?
My downstairs neighbour had to leave her property. There was a massive pile of rubbish in our back court. It hadn't been getting collected because there's not enough bins, so the rubbish got piled up. The council didn't have the resources to come and collect it. Rats started nesting in the rubbish. Once the rubbish got cleared, the rats, loads of them, had to go live somewhere. They infested my downstairs neighbour's flat, to such a bad degree that she had to leave her flat and get vermin teams in because her flat was unsafe to live in because there was so much rat waste underneath her floorboards. She had to get all her floors removed to get it all cleaned up. And that's the scale of the problem in this area. And the councillor Susan Aitken says there are problematic patches and it needs to spruce up. That's just not true. You know, if the councillors came to these communities and looked and saw what we had to live in, I don't think they'd want to live in them themselves. I doubt there are issues where they stay. So yeah, it's really good to see the community come together on this stuff. Yeah, can do.
I think that just the outing of Scottish Power in the national media kind of shamed them, and they ended up agreeing to write off Irene's debt. But the way it was funny, the way they framed it was as if they said, oh, there was a miscalculation and actually she only owed this much, but because of her bad experience, we'll write that off. But that wasn't true at all. She didn't owe any of the money, and it was funny that even right up to the end, them kind of framing it as if they were being generous here.
Yeah, the way they framed it as, you know, the mighty Scottish Powers bestowing a gift on Irene of wiping her debt, when they should apologise for the way they treated her. Something I thought was quite interesting on the reporting of Irene's case, when it got into BBC Scotland, there was no mention of Living Rent. The entire news segment, the entire article about it, there was no mention that Irene had done this for Living Rent, and it was framed as, you know, poor Irene, you know, struggling, she's crying for help. Well, actually, Irene was a driving force behind the action. Like, Irene was standing up for herself with the support of our community and with the support of the people around her.
I wasn't after compensation or anything like that, but, you know, just wanting what was owed to me, and to be treated with respect. How many times has people been browbeaten down by these big giants of companies just to pay to keep the peace because they're at you on a constant basis?
If we just look at that individual case, Irene got her debt wiped, which was huge. The threatening letters have stopped, which I think was almost a bigger problem for Irene.
Living Rent is committed to keeping up the fight, keeping up the pressure, and sort of sticking up for tenants' interests, you know, wherever that may lie.
The victory wasn't just for us, it was a victory for more Scottish Power customers as well.
I see more and more joining Living Rent.
So the outcome has been quite good. So we've reopened negotiations with the council. So like the branch in Govan Hill is currently preparing for another meeting with the council to try and kind of like share like our demands and kind of get some real material benefit from that's needed. We're going to tell the council that it's not going to go away until it's addressed. We've got like a strong agenda that we've already set for the year on public services, clean streets, safe union jobs, doing a necessary and often thankless piece of work that we see as vital, and better education and kind of like more investment in how public services are used and better engagement with like the various kind of communities that make up the city. And the thing is, like, if you look at like where the waste crisis is in Glasgow, it's not in like Park Circus, and it's not in like, you know, more affluent parts of the city. Like, it's not in, you know, like, I'd imagine it would be taken care of a lot more swiftly if it was. You know, the fact is, like they've said, you know, these are the communities that we can take from, and these are the communities that we will give to. And so it's not to put communities in Glasgow against each other, but it's just saying that the council has decided that some areas are worth cleaning more than others. And like that's a lot to do with how they feel about the people that live there.
This morning.
The 22nd of December, the Scottish government published a housing strategy, and then after that, what they do is like they open up a consultation. So whatever comes out of this consultation gives basically, the government will look at it and then turn that into law. So if nobody talks about, you know, we need better rights for tenants and we need rent controls, etc., well, it's just never gonna happen. So this was, a big achievement again of, Living Rent really pushing for like housing to be back on the political agenda. We need generally affordable home, and so for that we're proposing a system of rent control that would be a point-based system of rent control that would be attached basically to the quality of the house and the amenities and attached to the property as opposed to the lease. Because at the moment what's happening is that when tenants move to another property, well, that's when landlords push the price up. So again, the quality of the home, like the location, nothing has changed just because the tenant move in and out. So the idea is like, no, you need to fix that to the property and not the lease. And this is really not like the goal is really to actually not just limit the rent increase, but bring rents down. Like rents are already too high. So this is not a rent cap. This is a system that would really be working in order to bring rents down. Social tenants every year are being sent a letter. It's a consultation around their rent increase. And so every year you get a letter saying, hey, would you like your rent to go up by 2%, by 3%, or by 4%? And you never have an option to reject the rent increase. The other problem is most people don't even bother filling it out because we know that basically whatever you fill out, the decisions have already been made. And so we would like them to be also legally binding. Because at the moment, even if you would answer, I don't know, the lowest rent increase, for example, they don't have to listen to it. They can just do whatever they want. So that's why there's been stalls happening every week all across the city, all across the country, where we go out and we have, we ask people about what do they think about the rented sector. People are really worried at the moment. We're today, now energy prices are going up, the cost of living is going up, our wages are not going up. So it's a no-brainer for people to say, we need rents to be going down. The goal is really to get at least 5,000 people across Scotland to endorse these demands, to really show that actually people care and people want to have rent controls in place.
We have had a lot of very clear campaign victories. We've got big national wins, like when we got the eviction moratorium in place right as the pandemic started, preventing any evictions happening for almost a year. But what I think is important to remember is that the point of the campaign is not just to win the issue that you're currently working on, it is to build up the capacity of the branch and of the people involved to be able to repeat the success, and to make it bigger and better the next time.
It really is about ensuring that this imbalance between landlords and tenants doesn't exist, and working together achieves a lot more than trying to fight landlords by yourself. And that's what makes Living Rent so successful, is the camaraderie, the support, and working together to truly build working class power.
We are the only housing organisation that gives ordinary real people a direct opportunity to create a vision for what housing should look like and to decide how they want to live. And I think that way of working is our real contribution to the housing struggle.
I don't see any other way of making a difference other than collective action, and this idea of going street by street and block by block and uniting under a cause of better housing, of cheaper housing, of safer housing.
We're now at a juncture in terms of housing where the notion that we can mediate perfectly between the interests of landlords, be they social or private, and tenants is now untenable.
There is no middle. You're on the side of the tenants or you're on the side of the landlords that oppress them. That's the reality of it.
Fundamentally, It's not a complicated job to provide safe, affordable and secure housing for tenants. And I think the more we allow it to become abstracted into some wider discussion, and the less we focus on just the actual concrete material facts, then it sort of plays into the hands of people who would sort of see it as some massive, hurdle to be overcome.
I think one of the causes for despair and why the world in the future feels really hopeless is because we've been alienated from each other. By ourselves, we don't have much power. It's fair to feel powerless and hopeless if you think that you're by yourself. And what Living Rent shows, to me at least, is that there is a source for optimism in us coming together and fighting together and caring for each other.
Living Rent does help to provide this feeling that, the person living across the hall from you, you have way more in common with them than you do have differences with them, and that's what really matters.
When you become part of this group, you feel you've been listened to, you feel you're being supported.
It's no matter what nationality you are, it's no matter what color you are. They will help you like a family member.
There's nothing you can't do when you get organised in your community, and like when you get organised as a class, you can stop evictions, you can get investment in crumbling housing, and you can win things that you can't even imagine winning right now on your own. So yeah, join Living Rent.